Disclaimer. This video is a work of fiction. All characters, organizations, and events portrayed are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or real events, is purely coincidental. The video includes dramatic depictions of violence and criminal activity for storytelling purposes only. It does not promote, glorify, or instruct illegal behavior. Viewer discretion is advised. Support the channel by liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications for more episodes. Thank you for watching. The night heat of Miami settled heavy over the small mechanic shop at the edge of the highway, the kind of place where the asphalt never cooled, and the smell of oil and burned rubber clung to the air like an old habit. Jack Thorne stood in the dim glow of a single hanging bulb, tightening the last bolt on a busted transmission. His hands were scarred, strong, and precise hands that had once handled more than just wrenches and grease. He wiped the sweat from his brow, hearing the faint hum of the city beyond the shop's thin walls. Somewhere out there, the world was still moving fast, but Jack had chosen to slow down. He'd been off the road for almost 5 years. No more late-night hauls across the interstate. No more shadow convoys with unmarked cargo. The last time he'd taken a special delivery, blood had spilled across the highway near El Paso, blood that never washed away, no matter how much rain came. Since then, he kept his head down. Small jobs, cash only, nothing that made anyone look twice. He told himself it was peace. It felt more like exile. The bell above the shop door rang. Jack looked up, expecting another impatient customer, but instead, it was his sister, Emily. Her face carried that same worried tension he'd seen too many times when they were kids, back when she used to wait up for him to come home from the road. Now she stood framed in the doorway, thin arms crossed, clutching a worn purse like a lifeline. "Jack," she said softly, almost whispering, "I need your help." He straightened slowly, sensing the weight behind those words. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, eyes darting toward the parking lot, as if afraid someone had followed her. It's some money stuff. I borrowed from people I shouldn't have. They said they'd help with the rent, and now? Who?" His tone was sharp. He already knew the answer before she spoke. "Davis's crew. The ones who hang around the docks." Jack cursed under his breath. Davis used to work under Morales, the cartel middleman who'd once paid Jack for quiet deliveries. The connection was too close, too ugly. "How much?" "20 grand, she said, voice breaking. "They said if I don't pay by Friday, they'll come for me." Jack stepped closer, jaw tight. "You should have told me sooner." "I didn't want you to go back there," she whispered. "You said you were done with that life." "I was," he muttered. "But they didn't forget me." That night, after she left, he sat outside the shop with a beer that tasted more like guilt than comfort. The hum of cicadas mixed with the low rumble of traffic from the interstate. He thought about the past, about faces that were gone and debts that never stayed buried. When he finally went inside, the message light on his old flip phone blinked red. He pressed play. "Still alive, Thorne?" The voice was rough, dry, but unmistakable. "It's Lou. Heard your name floating around again. I've got a run-one job. Big payout. No questions. No paperwork. Just like old times. Call me." Jack closed his eyes. The timing was too perfect. Too cruel. The same night his sister begged for help, his old partner crawled out of the dark with an offer. He didn't call immediately. He tried to sleep. Failed. By morning, the thought of Emily's pale face, the fear in her voice, had burned away any hesitation. When he finally dialed, Lou picked up before the first ring finished. "Didn't take you long," Lou said. "Knew you'd come around." "I haven't said yes," Jack replied. Sure. But you're asking where and when, aren't you?" Jack didn't answer. "Meet me at the port tonight," Lou said. "Bar called The Wharf. Around 10. We'll talk." The line went dead. That evening, Miami's skyline glimmered over the dark water, neon reflected in the oily ripples of the bay. The wharf was the kind of place that didn't ask for ID or receipts. The air smelled of salt and cigarettes. Lou sat in a corner booth, same worn leather jacket, same wolfish grin. Time hadn't softened him, it had sharpened him. "Didn't think you'd ever crawl out from under that rock," Lou said, sliding a glass across the table. Jack didn't drink. "You said one job. Easy haul, 3 states. Cargo sealed and tagged. No stops, no questions. Big money. Enough to clear whatever's hanging over your head." Jack's eyes narrowed. "What kind of cargo?" Lou shrugged. "The kind that stays locked. Don't overthink it, Thorne. You just drive." Jack leaned back, studying his old partner. "I'm done running guns, Lou." "This ain't guns," Lou smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "At least not for us to worry about. Look, I know you, man. You don't do this for cash. You do it 'cause you can't stand watching the people you love drown. And I'm guessing your sister's already in deep." Jack's stomach turned. "Who told you about her?" Lou didn't answer. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the table. "Advance. Half now, half when it's done. You'll need the cash." Jack hesitated, then picked it up. It felt heavy. Inside was a stack of bills and a single glossy photograph. Emily, standing outside her apartment, taken that morning. Jack's hand clenched around the photo. "What the hell is this?" "Insurance," Lou said quietly. "You walk away, they'll collect from someone else. You drive, everyone gets paid. Simple math." Jack didn't speak. He left the bar without finishing the drink. The city air outside felt colder than it should have. He stood by the water, the sound of the waves mixing with the hum of the freeway across the bridge. He'd been trying to live straight, trying to bury the past. But the past had a way of digging itself out. By the time he reached the shop again, dawn had started to smear the horizon pink and gray. He opened the envelope again, staring at the photo, then at the money. He didn't want the cash. He wanted leverage, a way to end it once and for all. He started prepping the rig just after sunrise. Old habits came back, quick checking oil, calibrating brakes, tuning the engine until it purred low and even. The fender still bore scars from older days, bullet marks hidden under new paint. He packed a small duffel, spare ammo, a burner phone, a map, and a family photo that looked older than it should have. That night, he met Lou outside a warehouse on the outskirts of Houston. The air buzzed with insects and electricity. The container waited in the shadows, metallic, unmarked, silent. A handful of men in plain clothes stood nearby. No logos, no words, just watching. They didn't nod or speak when Jack arrived. They just motioned toward the rig. Lou smirked. "Told you it'd be easy." Jack glanced at the men, then at the sealed crate. "What's in it?" Lou shrugged. "Nothing you need to lose sleep over. They said it's equipment." "Military?" Jack asked. "No labels, no papers," Lou said. "Best not to look too close." But Jack did look. The way the men handled the cargo, careful, reverent, wasn't how you treated machinery. It was how you handled something dangerous. He felt a chill crawl under his skin. They finished loading before midnight. As Lou signed off the final manifest, Jack noticed one of the loaders watching him. Eyes cold, unblinking. The man had a small tattoo on his neck, a black cross, faded but distinct. Jack had seen that symbol before, years ago, stamped on crates heading to cartels south of the border. He climbed into the cab, engine rumbling like a restrained animal. Lou slapped the side of the door. "Next stop, Louisiana. Don't stop. Don't talk. Don't open it. Easy road." Jack nodded without looking at him. The tires crunched over gravel as he pulled away from the warehouse. headlights slicing through the dark. In the rearview mirror, the men were already fading into shadows. The container sat heavy behind him, metal gleaming faintly under the moonlight. He didn't know what was inside, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, it wasn't just another haul. And somewhere deep down, he felt it starting again. The old pulse, the quiet rhythm of danger he'd sworn he'd never feel again. The road ahead stretched black and endless, and he drove straight into it, the weight of the cargo pressing behind him like a secret waiting to explode. The hum of the highway was hypnotic, a long mechanical lullaby that stretched into the black ribbon of night. Jack Thorne kept his hand steady on the wheel, eyes flicking between the mirrors and the endless stream of white lines that rolled beneath the tires. Behind him, the trailer loomed like a silent beast, heavy and inert, its weight pressing through every movement of the truck. The Houston warehouse was long behind him now, swallowed by the darkness and the thick southern humidity that clung to the windshield. The farther he drove, the quieter it felt inside the cab. Only the low growl of the engine kept him tethered to the moment. The first 100 miles were uneventful. He crossed small towns and gas stations that looked identical, fluorescent lights flickering over empty pumps, the occasional shadow of a stray dog darting through the lot. Every now and then he passed another trucker, a brief flash of mutual recognition in the passing headlights before the road swallowed them both again. But the longer he drove, the more something in his gut twisted. The cargo was too heavy. The suspension creaked differently, more sluggish than it should. He could feel the imbalance every time he hit a bump or curve. It wasn't normal freight. He'd told himself not to look, not to think, not to ask. That had always been the rule when he worked for people like Morales. Drive, deliver, forget. But the problem with secrets was that they never stayed buried once curiosity took root. At the edge of Beaumont, he pulled into a rest stop. The parking lot was empty except for a single RV with its lights off. He parked far from the lampposts, killed the engine, and sat there for a long time listening to the ticking metal as the rig cooled. His pulse quickened as he climbed down. The night air was thick and wet, crickets droning somewhere beyond the road. He circled to the back of the trailer, flashlight in hand, and stared at the steel doors. The lock was industrial grade, welded shut with new seams. He crouched, running his fingers along the edges. Someone had acid-washed the identification numbers clean. No markings, no ownership, nothing to trace. He stood there a long moment, fighting the instinct screaming at him to pry it open. Finally, he slid a wrench from his pocket, jammed it into the seam, and pulled. The first crack of metal echoed across the lot. Inside, under the faint beam of his flashlight, were rows of reinforced crates stacked with perfect precision. He opened one. The hinges resisted, as if reluctant to reveal what they were guarding. When the lid finally lifted, he froze. Metal glinted in the dark, sleek black components that resembled turbine housings and folded arms. Drones. Military-grade, modular, and freshly manufactured. Each one had its serial number filed off, and a residue of acid burn where identification plates had been. Beneath them lay sealed containers of ammunition, circuit boards, and tracking devices. It wasn't just contraband. It was an arsenal. Jack's throat went dry. He could hear the faint whine of distant traffic, the low hum of the truck's cooling engine, and underneath it all, the quiet electric buzz of fear. Whoever owned this cargo wasn't just running weapons. They were preparing for something larger, something domestic. He shut the crate carefully, locked the door, and stood there with his hands on the cold steel. He wanted to believe it was still just a job, but deep down he knew. This wasn't a delivery. It was a fuse waiting to be lit. He climbed back into the cab, heart still hammering. When he turned the ignition, a faint click came through the radio. Then silence. He frowned, adjusting the frequency. Static. Then another click, followed by a breath. No words. Just someone listening. He shut it off and stared into the darkness beyond the windshield. The road was empty. Yet the feeling of being watched grew heavier by the mile. By dawn, he'd crossed into Louisiana. The air smelled of swamp and diesel, and mist hung low over the bridges. He stopped again at a roadside diner, not because he was hungry, but because he needed to see human faces, to remind himself that the world outside the truck still existed. The waitress poured him coffee without asking, eyeing the rig through the window. "Big haul," she said absently. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Halfway through the cup, two men in suits stepped out of a black SUV parked near the pumps. They weren't locals, too clean, too deliberate. One leaned against the hood, scanning the parking lot. The other came inside, ordered a coffee, and sat near the door without drinking it. Jack kept his eyes down. When he finished, he left cash on the table and walked out slowly. The man outside smiled faintly as their eyes met. Not friendly. Calculated. Back on the highway, the SUV followed at a distance. It stayed there for an hour, never getting closer, never falling behind. Then, just before the Atchafalaya Bridge, it vanished. No exits nearby, no side roads. Just gone. Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. He'd been in this kind of cat and mouse before. It always ended badly. The sun was sinking low when flashing lights appeared ahead. A roadblock. 2 patrol cars. A single agent in a windbreaker that read, Federal Task Force. Jack slowed, rolling down the window. The agent walked up, expression unreadable. "Mr. Thorne?" he asked quietly. Jack didn't answer. The man leaned closer. "Don't panic. We're not here to stop you." His eyes darted toward the trailer. "You're carrying something bigger than you realize. You keep driving, understand? Follow the route they gave you. Don't let them take it. We'll be behind you." "Who the hell are you?" Jack muttered. The agent straightened. "The only person who still wants you alive." Before Jack could reply, the man tapped the side of the rig twice and waved him through. The patrol cars pulled away without another word. Confused and furious, Jack pressed the accelerator. In his mirror, he saw the agent speaking into a radio, his expression grim. That night, the paranoia deepened. Every vehicle that appeared in the mirror felt like a threat. He could almost sense the eyes on him. Federal, cartel, maybe both. He replayed the words in his head. Don't let them take it. But who was them? And why did he suddenly feel like the most hunted man in 3 states? Near Lafayette, the rain began. Thick southern rain that turned the world into a gray curtain. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the wet asphalt and the empty billboards. Jack could barely see the road when headlights flared behind him again. Not 1, car 3. They closed the distance fast. He downshifted, engine roaring, but the trucks behind him matched speed. The first one bumped his rear fender. Jack gritted his teeth, hands locked on the wheel. The second vehicle swerved to the side, trying to cut him off. He rammed the accelerator, the tires screaming on the slick pavement. The impact came like thunder. Metal scraped metal, sparks flew, and the rain swallowed the sound of shouting voices. He yanked the rig into the next lane, forcing one of the pursuers into the guardrail. The crash echoed through the night. The other 2 kept coming. He pushed the truck harder than it was built to go, engine growling like an animal. The bridge ahead loomed narrow, slick, deadly. He aimed for it anyway. When the first of the chasing cars tried to follow, he slammed the brakes and watched in the mirror as the car hydroplaned, spinning out into the railing before disappearing over the edge. The second turned back. The third never reappeared. By the time he reached Baton Rouge, dawn had broken again. He was soaked in sweat, shaking, but alive. He parked at a small motel on the outskirts, pulling the rig behind a row of dumpsters. Inside the room, the air smelled of mildew and bleach. He locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and sat on the bed with his head in his hands. Lou answered on the second ring. "You made it." "Someone followed me," Jack said. "Yeah, I heard." "You lost them?" "For now." "Then you're fine. Just keep going. Next stop's New Orleans. You're almost done." Jack stared at the cheap wallpaper. "You didn't tell me what was in this truck." "You didn't need to know." "It's military," Jack said. "Drones, weapons. This isn't just a smuggling run. What the hell are we delivering?" Silence. Then Lou's voice came, quieter now. "You don't want that answer, brother. Trust me. Just drive." Jack hung up. He sat there listening to the faint hum of a bug zapper outside. Something moved in the parking lot footsteps, slow and deliberate. He went to the window, pulled the curtain back just enough to see a man standing by the rig. The stranger bent down, touched the back tire, then straightened and walked off into the fog. When Jack went out moments later, the man was gone. But on the tire, barely visible, was a small red mark paint, shaped like a cross. He scraped it off with a knife, heart pounding. Then he checked under the frame and found it. A GPS tracker, magnetized to the axle. He yanked it free, smashed it under his boot, and tossed the pieces into the dumpster. But when he climbed back into the cab, the radio crackled again. A voice came through, distorted, low. "Nice try, Thorne." He froze. "Who is this?" Static, then laughter. "You're late." The signal cut out. Jack sat there in the silence, every nerve screaming. He knew now that there were no sides, no safety, no one to trust. Whoever the federal man was, whatever Lou thought he was doing, he was caught in the middle of a war he didn't understand, and he had no choice but to keep driving. He looked out at the horizon, where the sky was turning the color of rust, and took a slow breath. Louisiana stretched ahead of him, humid and dangerous. Somewhere beyond the swamps and bridges, New Orleans waited. The next stop, maybe the last. He turned the key, the engine roared to life, and the road began to move again beneath him. As he pulled away from the motel, the rain began once more, washing the red mark from the asphalt. Behind him, in the empty room he'd just left, the phone began to ring. He never heard it. He never saw the unmarked SUV that slid into the road 2 miles behind, following him into the rising storm. And he didn't yet know that the voice on the radio hadn't been random. It had been calling him by name. The storm chased him out of Baton Rouge, a restless curtain of rain that turned the world into a blur of gray and light. The wipers worked furiously, beating in rhythm with the throbbing pulse in Jack's temples. He hadn't slept in over 30 hours. His hands ached from gripping the wheel too tightly. His eyes burned from the constant glare of headlights and lightning. Every mile felt longer than the one before. He was running now, and he knew it. The radio stayed silent, but that silence felt worse than the voice that had mocked him the night before. It was the silence of someone waiting. Watching. He crossed the Sabine Bridge just after noon, the sky an iron plate above him. The air smelled of ozone and river water, thick with tension. As he approached the midpoint, a line of orange cones came into view, stretching across both lanes. A work truck idled ahead, hazard lights flashing. 2 men in neon vests waved for him to slow down. Jack's instinct screamed before his brain caught up. There was something off in their posture. Too stiff. Too deliberate. The one on the left had a shoulder bulge under his vest that didn't fit a tool belt. The other wasn't looking at the truck at all. He was looking past Jack, toward the road behind him. He didn't brake. The first man lifted his hand as if to shout something, and that was enough. Jack slammed his foot on the gas. The horn blared, echoing across the bridge. The workers scattered. One dropped something metallic that clattered against the pavement. A second later, a sharp pop cut through the roar of the engine a gunshot. The windshield cracked, spiderwebbing right across his line of sight. Jack ducked instinctively and yanked the wheel left, clipping the fake work truck's bumper. The impact sent it spinning sideways as he roared past, metal scraping, sparks flying in the downpour. The rearview mirror showed chaos, one of the men tumbling over the guardrail, the other raising a weapon, firing into the rain. Bullets pinged off the trailer doors. Jack pressed harder on the accelerator, engine howling as he tore across the rest of the bridge. When he reached the end, he didn't look back. He knew this wasn't random. Someone had decided that he'd lived long enough. 10 miles later, he pulled off the highway onto an old service road lined with abandoned motels and rusting gas pumps. The truck sputtered over potholes before he finally brought it to a stop under the broken canopy of a long-dead station. He climbed down, heart still hammering, and checked the rig. One bullet hole through the rear panel, another lodged in the side mirror. Nothing fatal. He opened the door to the cab and reached for the radio, but the static hissed like a warning. Whoever was listening before was probably still there. He switched it off and leaned against the tire, breathing hard. His shirt clung to him, soaked with sweat despite the rain. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the weight of it all, the cargo, the pursuit, the uncertainty that had followed him since Houston. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was exhaustion. Bone deep and merciless. He stayed there for maybe 15 minutes before a familiar sound reached his ears. Another engine, a smaller one. He tensed, hand drifting toward the pistol tucked under his jacket. A faded blue pickup pulled into view, tires crunching over gravel. Lou stepped out, drenched, but grinning as if this were all some kind of joke. "Jesus, Thorne," he said, raising his hands. "You look like death on wheels." Jack didn't move. "You set me up?" Lou frowned. "You're welcome, by the way. I just saved your ass back on the bridge. You were there?" "Yeah. Those weren't my guys. They were someone else's. Probably cartel cleanup. You're lucky they didn't hit your tank." Lou's grin faded when he saw Jack's expression. "Look, man, I'm in this as deep as you are. You think I know who's pulling the strings? They feed me one job at a time. I don't ask. They don't kill me." Jack stepped closer, rain dripping off his jaw. "They know about my sister. You said it yourself." "That wasn't me, Jack," Lou said quietly. "They sent that photo, not me. They're watching both of us." Jack's anger ebbed, replaced by something colder clarity. He could see the truth in Lou's face. They were both pawns, pieces in a game run by ghosts. They didn't talk much after that. The storm was dying down, leaving behind the heavy stillness that always followed southern rain. Lou climbed into his pickup and followed behind as Jack's truck rumbled back onto the road. The plan was simple now. Get to New Orleans, deliver the cargo, and get out alive. But plans, Jack knew, had a way of bleeding out before the finish line. 2 hours later, the sun was low again, throwing orange light across the flooded fields. They stopped at a deserted truck stop just outside Lafayette. Jack went inside to use the bathroom, leaving Lou to refuel. The interior smelled of mildew and fried grease. A radio played somewhere, a preacher talking about sin and salvation. Jack washed his hands and stared into the cracked mirror above the sink. The face staring back didn't look like the man he remembered. It was harder, meaner, hollowed out by too many miles and too many lies. When he came out, the world had gone wrong again. The sound of engines filled the air, more than one. 3 black SUVs rolled into the lot, lights off, tires crunching slow and deliberate. Lou was frozen by the pump, hand halfway to his gun. Jack dropped to a crouch behind the front bumper, scanning. The first SUV door opened. Men stepped out. Black jackets, visors, rifles. Not cops, not cartel either. Something in between. Lou fired first. The shot cracked like thunder, dropping one of the men. Then the whole lot erupted. Jack sprinted toward the rig, bullets sparking off the concrete behind him. He dove into the cab, slammed the door, and turned the key. The engine coughed, then roared. Through the cracked mirror, he saw Lou go down, clutching his side. Jack's chest tightened. He wanted to go back. But he knew what would happen if he did. He slammed the gear into drive and hit the gas. Bullets tore through the back panels as he swung onto the highway. He caught a glimpse of the SUVs in pursuit, headlights flickering through the dusk. His knuckles whitened around the wheel. He pushed the truck harder, every shift of the gear sending a shudder through the frame. For miles, they chased him. Then, slowly, one by one, the lights behind him faded. Either they gave up, or they were waiting for something else. By the time he finally stopped again, the world had gone silent. The adrenaline drained out of him, leaving a hollow ache where fear had lived. He pulled into a cheap roadside motel, the kind where nobody asked names and everyone paid cash. He parked the truck around back, hidden from the main road, and carried his bag inside. The room was stale, air thick with cigarette smoke and decay. He shut the door, double-locked it, and sat on the bed. The silence pressed down on him until it hurt. He reached for the old flip phone and dialed Lou. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. He stared at the screen until it went dark, then set it down and pulled the small GPS device from his jacket. He'd found it attached to the trailer's frame earlier. Now he examined it closely under the yellow lamplight. There was a second module inside, smaller, almost invisible, designed to transmit even when smashed. He pried it out and crushed it under his boot. For a long time, he sat there in the dark, the storm outside fading into distant rumbles. He wanted to believe Lou was alive. He wanted to believe there was still a way out. But the truth was bleeding through, now slow, inevitable, undeniable. He wasn't supposed to make it to New Orleans. He was never supposed to deliver the cargo. He was supposed to disappear with it. A soft thump came from outside, then another. Jack froze, listening. Footsteps, slow and measured, moving along the row of rooms. Someone tried a door nearby, then another. The knob on his own door rattled. He moved silently, gun drawn, back pressed to the wall. The handle twisted again, but the lock held. The footsteps paused, then retreated. He waited another full minute before he breathed again. When he finally pulled the curtain aside, there was no one there, just the faint shimmer of headlights passing on the highway. But on the window glass, faintly smeared into the condensation, was a mark. A red cross. He wiped it away with his sleeve, heart pounding. The motel phone rang once, a short mechanical trill, then stopped. He picked it up anyway, listening to the silence. Then a voice came, low and calm. "We warned you not to open it." Jack didn't answer. The line went dead. He sat down on the bed, the gun still in his hand, and stared at the wall. The events of the day replayed in his head like fragments of a nightmare. Lou's shout, the bridge, the bullets, the rain. Somewhere between those moments, something had shifted inside him. The fear that had been gnawing at him since Houston had changed shape. It wasn't fear anymore. It was anger. Cold, clean, steady. He stood, went to the window, and looked at the truck. The moon had come out, lighting the silver edges of the trailer. Inside that steel box was the reason Lou might be dead, the reason Emily's life was in danger, the reason he was being hunted by ghosts with badges and guns. He couldn't run anymore. He had to know what this was, who it belonged to, and why they wanted it so badly. By dawn, he was already moving again. The rain had washed the roads clean, and the air smelled of wet pine and gasoline. He crossed the city limits of Lafayette and merged back onto the interstate, the horizon stretching wide and bright ahead of him. But behind the light, he could still see the shadow of Lou's body falling, the echo of gunfire rolling through the empty sky. He drove faster. He didn't know if he was chasing the truth or running from it. but the blood on the road behind him had marked the point of no return. He was done hiding, done following orders. Whatever waited for him in New Orleans, he was going to face it head on. And this time, he wouldn't be the one running. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon as Jack Thorne's truck rolled past the city limits of New Orleans, its tires humming a low warning over the cracked asphalt. The skyline rose ahead of him like a promise and a threat. Sharp-edged buildings glittering through the haze, a city built on secrets and survival. He had crossed half the South with a trailer full of death behind him and the ghosts of every mile whispering in his ear. The highway signs flickered past, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, and now the crescent city that seemed to breathe smoke and sin in equal measure. Somewhere in that sprawl was the end of the road, the place Lou had promised and never lived to see. He hadn't slept since the firefight at the truck stop. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lou's face as he fell, the sudden burst of red on his shirt, the sound of bullets ripping through rain. It replayed over and over until it stopped feeling real. Now, numbness had taken its place. He was alive because of momentum alone, the same blind drive that had carried him through 100 midnight runs back when he worked for Morales' network. But this wasn't a run anymore. It was an execution in slow motion, and he was driving himself toward the gun barrel. He followed the GPS coordinates Lou had left him before he died, an address near the industrial docks on the east side of the city, where warehouses leaned against one another like tired soldiers. The air was heavy with salt and diesel, the smell of metal and old oil rising from the puddles. Barges moved along the river, horns moaning like lost souls. Every shadow looked alive. Every face seemed to follow him. He parked behind a row of shipping containers and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. For a moment, he just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, feeling the pulse in his neck. He could walk away now. He could ditch the rig, disappear, start over in some other forgotten corner of America. But he knew it was too late for that. They had his sister. He'd seen her photo in that envelope, and then the voice on the motel phone had proven it. She was Leverage, nothing more, and Leverage didn't stay alive forever. He climbed down, boots splashing in the muddy water. The warehouse stood about 200 yards ahead, its wall streaked with rust and graffiti. The metal door at the front was slightly open, like an invitation or a trap. He didn't bother pretending it was one and not the other. He walked straight toward it, rain drizzling down in thin, cold threads. Inside, the air was stale and electric. Shafts of sunlight cut through holes in the roof, slicing across the dust like blades. In the center of the hangar stood a man in a black windbreaker, unarmed, calm, as if he'd been waiting there all night. Jack recognized him instantly, the federal agent from the Louisiana checkpoint, the one who'd told him to keep driving. "Thorne," the man said, his voice steady, measured. "You made good time." "You knew what was in that trailer," Jack said. His voice echoed through the cavernous space. "You sent me through anyway." The agent studied him. "You were already too deep. If I'd pulled you then, they would have sent someone else. At least this way, I knew where the cargo was." Jack's fists tightened. "Who are you working for?" "Same people you think you're running from," the agent replied. "The Bureau, the department, the names change. But what's inside that trailer is bigger than any one agency. That shipment wasn't supposed to exist, and now every man who touched it is marked for cleanup." Jack took a slow step forward. "Cleanup like Lou?" The agent didn't flinch. "I'm sorry about your friend. He made his choice." "Yeah," Jack said bitterly. "He did. So did I." A voice echoed from behind, smooth and familiar, in a way that made Jack's stomach twist. "You always were sentimental, Thorne." He turned. Out of the shadows stepped a tall man in a gray suit, smiling like he'd just walked into a cocktail party instead of a death trap. Morales, the same cartel handler who had hired Jack years ago and disappeared after the El Paso massacre. His smile hadn't changed, neither had the deadness behind his eyes. "Morales," Jack said, voice low. "Didn't think they'd let you out of Mexico." Morales chuckled. "They didn't. But money buys miracles, especially in your country." He gestured toward the agent. "Our friend here has been very cooperative. You should be too. Deliver the trailer, and your sister goes free." Jack didn't believe him, but he needed to play along long enough to understand the game. "What's in it?" he asked, though he already knew. Morales' eyes gleamed. "You saw, didn't you? My new toys, drones, guidance systems, encrypted hardware, the future of war, sold to whoever pays most, governments, rebels, doesn't matter. But you," he smiled wider, "you're the insurance. You have the only copy of the route manifest and the codes for the cargo locks. Without you, no one opens it." "So you used me," Jack said quietly. Morales shrugged. "You were always useful, until you stopped being obedient." Jack's gaze drifted toward the hangar's open doors, where the faint sound of tires on gravel echoed. Several vehicles were approaching, SUVs, maybe 6 or 7, their engines low and synchronized. He looked back at Morales. "Who else did you invite?" Morales' smile faltered. "Not mine." The agent swore under his breath and drew his weapon. "Feds," he said. "They traced the signal." "Or maybe your other buyers," Jack said. He backed toward the side door, hand brushing against his pistol. Outside, he could see the glint of movement, black figures spreading out across the yard. Within seconds, chaos erupted. Gunfire tore through the morning air, glass shattering, metal ringing. Jack ducked behind a stack of crates as bullets chewed into the walls. Morales' men returned fire, their rifles barking in unison. The agent shouted into his radio, calling for backup that would never come. The world dissolved into thunder and light. Jack crawled toward the back of the warehouse, his ears ringing. He had to think, had to move before the shooting reached the truck. If anyone got to the cargo, everything would be over. He reached the rig and pulled himself into the cab. The ignition roared to life, echoing like an explosion. He slammed the door shut and hit the gas, jerking the trailer forward into the open yard. The feds scattered as the 18-wheeler surged through the smoke. He drove it not toward the road, but toward a neighboring hangar, one that looked abandoned. He'd passed it earlier and noticed the old security tower beside it, the perfect vantage point. Now, it was his only option. He parked behind the structure and jumped out, grabbing the remote access pad he'd found inside the trailer. He didn't fully understand how it worked, but he recognized the familiar hum when the drones inside the trailer powered up. Their rotors spun faintly, the lights blinking red in the dark interior. He climbed the tower's ladder 2 rungs at a time until he reached the top platform, soaked in sweat and adrenaline. From up here, he could see the entire yard feds, cartel gunmen, unmarked mercenaries all killing each other in the name of secrets they didn't understand. The city skyline shimmered beyond them, indifferent to the carnage below. Jack lifted the control pad and switched on the link. A dozen drones lifted from the trailer in perfect unison, their wings slicing through the smoke. They hovered above the warehouse, silent, predatory. Jack watched them for a moment, then directed them toward Morales' men, the sky filled with the shriek of engines and the flash of detonations. The first explosion blew out the hangar doors. The second turned the yard into a firestorm. From somewhere below, Morales screamed something. Words Jack couldn't hear over the roar. It didn't matter. He wasn't listening anymore. This wasn't revenge. It was survival. He climbed down halfway when the heat hit him, waves of it rolling from the burning wrecks. At the base of the tower, movement caught his eye. A small figure stumbling through the smoke. His heart seized. Emily. Her hands were bound, her clothes torn, but she was alive. 2 armed men dragged her forward toward an SUV near the edge of the yard. Jack didn't think. He ran, gun drawn, weaving between burning vehicles. The first man didn't see him coming. A single shot took him down. The second turned too late, and Jack drove into him shoulder first, slamming him against the hood. The weapon clattered to the ground. They struggled, fists and elbows, until Jack got hold of the gun and fired once, point blank. The man fell, and the world went still except for the crackle of flames. Emily was shaking, eyes wide and wild. "Jack," she gasped. "They said you'd bring them what they wanted. They said—" "I know," he said, cutting her loose. "We're leaving." He pulled her toward the truck, but halfway there, a sharp tone pierced the air, a high-pitched beeping coming from the trailer. He froze. The sound was familiar. A timer. He ran to the rear of the truck and yanked open the door. The interior glowed with blinking lights. One of the crates had been wired, its circuitry altered. A dead man's switch. Someone had armed a bomb inside the trailer, tied to the ignition or maybe the drone controls. The timer read less than 3 minutes. "Emily, get back!" he shouted. She hesitated. "Jack! Go!" He climbed into the cab and grabbed the detonator from the dash, slamming it into neutral. He had no idea if disconnecting power would stop the countdown, but he couldn't take the chance. The only way was distance. He gunned the engine, sending the rig barreling toward the far end of the yard. The bomb beeped faster. He jumped out at the last second, hitting the ground hard and rolling through mud and debris. The explosion tore through the morning like the wrath of God. Fire consumed the trailer, the blast wave flattening everything nearby. Windows shattered for half a mile. The shock hit him in the chest like a hammer, knocking the breath from his lungs. When he opened his eyes, the sky was gray with smoke. The hangar was gone, Morales' men gone, the agent gone. All that remained was ruin. He pushed himself up, every muscle screaming. Emily ran toward him, coughing, her face streaked with ash. He caught her and held her close, the only thing still alive in a world that had burned itself clean. Somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. He could see the flashing lights approaching through the haze police. Fire, maybe the same federal units that had betrayed him. There was no time to wait. He led Emily toward the river, away from the smoke and the noise, through the maze of rusted containers and broken fences, until they reached the water's edge. They stood there for a moment, breathing the thick, acrid air. Emily clung to his arm. "What now?" she asked quietly. Jack looked back at the burning yard, the black plume rising like a signal to every power that had tried to use him. "Now," he said, "we disappear." He didn't know where they would go, or how long they could stay hidden. He only knew that whatever had started with that sealed container had ended in fire, and somewhere in the ashes of New Orleans, the last of his debts had finally been paid. As they walked along the riverbank, the sirens faded behind them, swallowed by the wind and the steady whisper of water against steel. The city carried on, indifferent, eternal. And Jack Thorne, the man who had once been a ghost on America's highways, vanished into its shadow once more. The river was still burning when the sun finally clawed its way above the horizon. Thick smoke drifted over the water like a shroud, swallowing the ruined warehouses and the twisted metal carcasses that had once been trucks and shipping containers. Jack Thorne stood on the opposite bank with Emily beside him, both of them half covered in soot. The explosion had scorched the night out of the sky and left behind a silence so deep it felt sacred. The city was waking slowly now, sirens echoing through the mist, distant helicopters slicing through the dawn. But here, on the edge of the wasteland, there was only the steady breath of the river. Emily's hands trembled as she wiped the ash from her face. "You said it was over," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "Tell me it's over, Jack." He looked out at the wreckage, the last curls of flame reflecting in his eyes. He wanted to tell her yes. He wanted to believe it. But he knew better. The kind of people who moved weapons like that, who killed without hesitation and buried their enemies in paperwork, didn't disappear in one fire. They rebuilt, repainted, and came back under new names. "Not yet," he said quietly, "but it will be." They walked until their legs felt hollow. The river bent south toward the industrial outskirts, where a few forgotten neighborhoods still clung to life among the empty factories. They found an abandoned garage, half collapsed and littered with old tools, and took shelter there as the light strengthened. Jack broke open a vending machine and found a few bottles of water, their labels faded, but still sealed. Emily drank first, then sat with her back against the wall, eyes closed. Jack couldn't rest. He kept pacing the cracked floor, every sound outside feeding the restless paranoia that had kept him alive this long. Somewhere beyond the ruined fence, he could hear police radios squawking and the low hum of engines. He knew they were searching the area. They'd find the blast site, the bodies, the melted remains of the drone components, and then they'd start asking questions. His name was already on half the manifests tied to that shipment, and Morales had made sure of the rest. He checked his pistol. 2 rounds left. The second gun, Lou's old revolver, was empty. He tossed it aside and sat down beside Emily. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sound of sirens faded gradually, replaced by the rhythmic clatter of rain beginning to fall again. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was small, fragile. "I thought you were dead." He looked at her, seeing traces of the little sister who used to wait on the porch for him to come home from long hauls, back when life still had rules and boundaries. "I almost was," he said, "a few times. They said you were working for them, that you owed them. I did. A long time ago." He rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of every choice pressing down. "I thought I could pay it off by walking away, but there's no clean exit in that world. You don't retire, you get buried." She reached out and took his hand. "Then let's run. We can leave tonight. There's money in my account, enough to—" "They'll trace it," he said, shaking his head. "And they'll find us. I need to finish this." "Finish what?" He didn't answer right away. The question hung between them like a blade. Outside, the rain thickened, washing the soot from the shattered windows. He could smell the faint tang of ozone again, the same scent that had followed him since Houston. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "There's a man still out there, the agent who met me in Louisiana. He was working both sides. Feds and cartel. If he's alive, he's got records. Names. I need to find him before they do." Emily stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Jack, you can't go back out there. You'll die." He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe. But if I don't, they'll keep coming. For me. For you." By midday, the rain stopped. Jack found an old motorcycle in the corner of the garage, the frame rusted, but the engine mostly intact. He spent an hour coaxing it back to life with what tools he could scavenge. When the engine finally coughed and rumbled, Emily jumped at the sound. He handed her a jacket and a pair of gloves that didn't fit. "Take the road north," he said. "Find a motel past Slidell. Pay cash. Don't use your name. Wait for me 3 days. If I don't come, keep going. Cross into Georgia." Her lip trembled. "You think I'm just going to leave you here?" "Yes. Jack," he put a hand on her shoulder. "It's the only way. You've got a chance at something normal. Don't waste it trying to save me." For a long time, she didn't move. Then she nodded, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on her cheeks. She climbed onto the bike, hands shaking as she gripped the handlebars. He pushed it out to the edge of the road, gave it one last look, then slapped the seat twice. She drove off without looking back. When the sound of the engine finally faded into the distance, he turned toward the city again. The air was heavy with smoke and memory. He walked until he reached the riverfront, where emergency crews had already cordoned off the wreckage. From across the water, he could see the flashing lights, the black SUVs, and the men in suits moving like ants among the ruins. They were collecting something pieces of the drones, maybe the hard drives that hadn't been completely melted. He knew they'd find traces of him there. Footprints, fragments, the kind of evidence that never disappeared completely. But none of it mattered. He wasn't going to hide anymore. He was going to make sure this story ended properly. By nightfall, he had stolen a truck from a construction site and driven west toward Baton Rouge, following the faint trail of the federal agent he'd met on the road, the man who'd called himself Andrews. The news on the radio called him something else now. A rogue operative suspected of collusion with criminal networks. They said he'd disappeared after a raid on a classified transport. Jack almost laughed. The world had already written their story for them. He was the villain, and Andrews was the traitor who'd helped him. 2 days later, he found the man. It was in a roadside diner outside Lake Charles, the kind of place where the coffee was always burnt and the jukebox hadn't worked in 20 years. Jack walked in and saw him sitting at a corner booth, wearing the same black windbreaker, the same calm expression. For a second, it felt like déjà vu, as if nothing had happened, and they were just two men meeting over a cup of coffee. Then Andrews looked up and froze. "Thought you were dead," the agent said. Jack sat across from him. "You're not easy to find." Andrews sighed. "You shouldn't have come. They'll be watching." "They already are," Jack said. "So let's make it worth their time." Andrews studied him for a moment, then leaned back. "You think you can take them down? The people behind this? You don't even know who they are." "I don't need names," Jack replied. "Just proof." The agent hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data drive. "I've been running for 2 weeks with this. Internal communications, manifests, payment logs. Enough to burn every man who signed off on that shipment. But you won't live long enough to use it." Jack took the drive, slipping it into his pocket. "That's not your problem." Andrews looked at him for a long time, then nodded slowly. "You're a stubborn bastard, Thorne. Always were. You think doing this makes you a hero?" Jack shook his head. "No, it just makes me free." They parted without another word. By morning, Andrews would be gone again, and Jack would be heading north. He didn't know yet what he would do with the data, or who he could trust to release it. Maybe no one. Maybe it didn't matter. The point was to make sure that the people who'd built that machine of blood and silence couldn't keep it hidden. When he reached the state line, the rain started again. He drove until the clouds thinned, until the horizon opened up in front of him like a clean slate. The road stretched endlessly, a silver ribbon cutting through the dark. He could feel the weight of everything he'd lost pressing at the edges of his mind. Lou's last breath, Emily's tears, the roar of that final explosion. But beneath it all was something quieter. Not peace, not yet, but the start of it. A week later, in a small town in Tennessee, the local police found a burned-out pickup on the edge of a field. Inside, they discovered a half-melted badge, a shattered phone, and a note scrawled in grease pencil across the dashboard. Tell the truth. No body was ever found. Months passed. The story of the New Orleans explosion faded from the headlines, buried under newer tragedies. The investigation into the illegal weapons transport was sealed under national security statutes. The world moved on. But every so often, on long stretches of interstate in the dead of night, truckers would talk about a man who drove a black rig with no plates and no company name, his headlights never off, his route never fixed. He didn't stop for fuel at regular stations. He didn't speak on the radio. Some said he was running from something. Others said he was carrying something he couldn't let go of. One old driver swore he'd passed him once near the Mississippi line just before dawn. The man in the black rig had looked over, eyes hidden behind dark glass, and nodded once before vanishing into the fog. Jack Thorne was gone, officially. The record said he died in the explosion at the port of New Orleans. The Bureau had closed the file, marked it unsolved, and moved on to the next crisis. But out on the road, somewhere between the shadows of yesterday and the promise of tomorrow, a solitary truck still rolled through the night, humming its low metallic song across the asphalt. And though no one could prove it, some swore that when lightning hit the horizon, just for a second, you could see the reflection of a small silver locket hanging from the dashboard, one engraved with the letter E. Then the thunder would roll, and the highway would swallow the sound whole, leaving only the whisper of tires and the endless, restless hum of a man who refused to die. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Check out the next episode and explore more videos on the channel. There's plenty more coming soon.